Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're going to get started here in about 5 minutes. We'll let everybody get logged on. I'm opening a poll right now, asking some questions about who's joining us today. So if you could answer those, that would be great. It'll give us some idea of who's with us and help us tailor the presentation. Welcome, everyone. We'll get started here in a few minutes. As you log on, make sure you join our poll. We've got 2 questions asking about who's joining us today, kind of give us a better idea of what organization you're with, and what your current operating status is. So if you could answer those for us, that would be great. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. This is a webinar and not a meeting, so if this is your first Zoom webinar, you will not be seen. Your camera is not recording what you're doing or what your dogs are doing in the background or anything like that. So you will not be seen, and you will not be heard either. So everyone is automatically muted during a webinar. Please fill out our poll if you haven't had a chance to yet. We're gauging who's with us today, and we will be getting started in about 2 more minutes. Thanks to everyone joining us today. We have a poll happening. If you get to answer those 2 questions, that would be great. Give us an idea of who's with us today, and we will be getting started in 1 more minute. Hi, Loopy. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. We are so happy to have everyone with us. As you log on, make sure you fill out our poll. We're asking people what type of program they're with, or organization they're with, and how your operating status stands right now. And we're looking forward to getting started here in just a couple more seconds. If you haven't been to a Zoom webinar before, you will not be seen, your camera is not on, and you are muted also. So you may ask questions in the chat box. Anna and I are here to monitor the chat box. And there's also a question and answer feature at the bottom that you could ask questions with. We will be answering questions at the end of this webinar. So if you have a question and you put it in the chat and it's not something that Anna and I can answer, we'll be sure to get to it at the end. If you put it in the Q&A, you can get to it at the end or also email you afterwards. This is being recorded, so it will be available, the full thing of it will be available on our website at www.aee.org. So if you do have to leave or get interrupted, feel free to go back to our website and take a look at the rest of it when you're done. Great. It's 1 minute after 1 o'clock, and we'll go ahead and get started because I know we have a full presentation for us today. This is the Association for Experiential Education COVID-19 webinar series. I'm Sherry Bagley. I'm the Executive Director of AEE. We have been providing these webinars free of charge to all of our members and also to anyone else who would like to join. We are doing this in order to help provide information to folks. We have been working really hard to reach out to people during this time and to really focus on getting people the support and the help they need. So to that end, we have all of our webinars free of charge on our website, www.aee.org, as well as a resource library. We keep adding new things to the community resource library with all kinds of different topics, mental health, what you can do with your kids, ways to connect more experientially online. So we have a lot of resources on that resource library. Feel free to take a look at that. And if you have anything to add, let us know. My email I'm putting in the chat right now. So if you have resources you'd like to add, you can send those to me. Also, we're continuing to do the webinar series. We will have several more popping up in the next couple weeks. And if you have a thought about a webinar or something that you're in need of, please let us know that too, and we'll see if we can find somebody to fulfill that need for you. Again, we're the Association for Experiential Education. We're a membership organization, and we love to have new members. You can also check that out on our website. And right now, if you haven't filled out the poll, please do so in the next couple minutes. But today we have Rick Curtis with us. He's a professor at Princeton University, and he's been involved in all levels of risk management, has developed some tools for helping establish the risk of certain activities, and he's geared it toward COVID-19 for this presentation for us. So we're really looking forward to this information, and hopefully it will be of great value to you all. I'm going to end our poll now and let us all take a look at it. So for category that best describes your organization, we've got 39% our outdoor program, 4% our guide service training provider, 8% summer camp, 10% experience-based training and development, 4% therapeutic adventure, 9% K-12, 24% college university, and 4% adventure travel. And it looks like a good portion of our programs and our people who are here today are operating virtually only 52%. So we only have 1% of our folks that are here today that are open and operating normally. So thank you all for sharing that information with us. We really appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and get started now. And thank you so much, Rick.
Great. All right. Thanks, Sherry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Let me pop off. So my name is Rick Curtis. I'm the director of the Outdoor Action Program at Princeton University. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I've worked at Princeton for the last 39 years. We do an outdoor orientation program for incoming first-year students. And so within that, I've sort of dealt with incidents and risk management for anything from storm-related emergencies to anaphylaxis, serious injuries and illnesses, etc. And so dealing with risk management is something that I do on a daily basis as a program director, but also thinking about how we teach this to student staff who are very new to the field. And so how do we integrate education around risk management to all of our student staff? I'm also the author of the Backpackers Field Manual. I am the founder of OutdoorEd.com, and also the founder of Incident Analytics, which is a cloud-based software for tracking incidents and close calls. So in terms of looking at today, the learning objectives are really going to be looking at the risk assessment and safety management model. And that looks at what are the contributing factors, the things that lead to increased risk and potential accidents, and what are the mitigating factors? So how do we do an analysis of contributing and mitigating factors to manage risk more effectively? And then we're going to look at that from the standpoint of what's known as Safety 1 and Safety 2, and I'll dive into those more deeply as we go. Another thing, particularly right now, is understanding what factors are in scope, allowing you to take action, and what are out of scope. So for example, many of us are not operating because in our states, we're not allowed to go out into parks, etc. So within a risk management construct right now, we are dealing with a lot of stuff that's out of our scope, out of our control completely. And so being able to identify as you're trying to make decisions moving forward is about COVID-19 in your operations is really thinking about what do I have control over and what do I not have control over. And then the last thing is really understanding the role that incident data collection plays in terms of being able to analyze accidents and close calls and how we can use that to build both sort of a Safety 1 and a Safety 2 approach to dealing with risk management. So first, let's kind of look at just kind of an overall definition of stuff. And some of this is stuff that I know is very familiar to all of you already, but I want to kind of get us all on the same page about what we're sort of talking about. So typically when we think about risk, we call risk the potential for loss or injury, some kind of negative consequence. And so I think about that as negative R. And of course, if there is such a thing as negative R, there also must be positive R. So that's the potential for gain, for growth and development. And these two things are sort of directly linked to each other. What we need to think about is the risk and reward balance. Whatever program we are dealing with, and this, again, particularly in terms of COVID-19, we have to think about what the potential risks are in our program activities and how those risks balance against the rewards that we get from doing those things. I run a college outdoor orientation program, and our job is to orient incoming students to college, team build, reduce anxieties, deal with imposter syndrome. Those are our kind of overarching goals. And so most of our trips happen on the Appalachian Trail on the East Coast. We're doing pretty low-level backpacking trips, low-level canoeing trips. So in terms of the activities and stuff that we're doing and the location, we have a pretty low -R, okay? Our risk levels from doing those kinds of activities are low, and at the same time, the sort of positive R, the growth that we get out of that is also not gigantic. So it's always important from an ethical standpoint to be able to look at the balance between these things. I know some of the people in the audience, for example, are working in therapeutic adventure. So if you're dealing with a population that's suicidal or has anorexia, you're dealing with people who already are at serious life risk from the current issues that they're dealing with. You have a pretty big positive R if you can create a therapeutic environment for them to move beyond those problems. And so you might be willing to take a much bigger negative R than I would with a bunch of college students in order to achieve that end. So the reason that this is important right now is that the balance that we usually work with, I think all of our programs have kind of reached this equilibrium of saying, okay, here's what we do, here's the reward, and here's what we're willing to deal with. And COVID-19 has sort of totally tipped the bucket over. And a big question that everybody is asking is, what do we do? When do we return? And so a lot of that is really being able to look at what are all the negative R influences that COVID-19 has suddenly thrown into the mix here that we have to deal with. And as an organization, we have to decide, is it appropriate for us to go back to business as usual? People have gone to doing stuff virtually, and in essence, they're saying, okay, we can't do that. We're going to accomplish our mission in a different way. And so as things start to change over the next several months, and we start to come out of COVID, at least at some level, then part of this process is going to be constantly reevaluating this balance and making decisions about what programs you want to do based on these two things. So, I think this is kind of a moment that we've all dealt with already, and our equilibrium has suddenly been shattered by COVID. So within this concept of thinking about R minus and R plus, we just need to understand that R minus is inherent and expected in outdoor or experiential activities. And it's integral. So one of the things that makes these programs have a positive R is the challenge experience and the unpredictability of being in an outdoor setting. We don't just sort of take people and say, okay, we're going to go to the gym and set up tents and walk around the gym for 5 days and camp out in the gym and cook. We don't expect that we would have the same positive R outcome out of doing that. So we accept that going into the woods is going to increase our negative R, but also we know that it enhances our positive R. So, so we always have to keep that balance in mind. When we're talking about risk management, in terms of determining that appropriate level of negative R, we've got to think of what we're defining today as an incident. And so an incident is either something that's an adverse outcome, it's some negative R that's actually occurred, or it's a close call or near miss. And that's basically saying we could have had something happen. And so we didn't actually have a negative R, but we had the potential for one. This is a slide that's from the New Zealand Mountain Safety Council, and a bunch of people may have seen this model before. It's the accident iceberg, and it's based on studies done by Bird and Germain of industrial accidents, but it applies really globally. And they looked, for example, at a Ford Motor plant with 10,000 workers, and they said, what do we see in terms of the accident rates within that? And the iceberg metaphor is that when you look at an iceberg, most of it is underwater. You don't see it. And in their study, they found that for every single serious or major injury, there would be 10 minor injuries, 30 cases of property damage, and 600 near misses. So let's say over the course of the year at this Ford Motor plant, there were 100 serious injuries. So then you have 1,000 minor injuries, 3,000 cases of property damage, and then 60,000 close calls. So it's really important that we don't just look at the very tip of the iceberg and say, that's the picture. It's really that close call near miss data that's most important. So one of the key takeaways, for today's talk is really thinking about on the incident data collection side, in order for you to be able to do a good assessment of what the risk levels are within your program, you really need to be collecting close call incident data, because that's going to give you a much better picture of what's actually transpiring. So obviously there are lots of different types of incidents: injury, illness, behavioral, bias incidents. But we also have to think about things like bullying, inappropriate sexual contact. So incidents is a really broad category of things. So let's take a look at the model itself. So the risk level is created by the interaction of hazard factors and safety factors. And no matter where you go or what you do, there is no such thing as a risk level of 0. There is always some level of inherent risk in anything we do. This is a formula that I'm sure everybody has seen. The risk level is basically defined by the probability that something will happen times the severity if it does. And the way I explain it to my students is, how likely is it to happen and how bad would it be? If you multiply those two factors together, you're going to get a risk level. So this is a very simplistic view with probability on the left axis and severity on the horizontal axis. And so if we just think about a very kind of simplistic scale of low, medium, high consequence and low, medium, high probability, when you multiply those two factors together, if you're in the low to medium, you end up kind of in that green zone. So basically, your level of risk is low. It's generally acceptable. And obviously, as the probability increases and or the severity level increases, then you start to move into that yellow sort of cautionary zone or into the red zone. And I tell my students, look, as you start to move towards that dashed line, you need to be thinking about what interventions you can engage in to halt the change moving from bottom left to top right. And that's really what we want people to be thinking about. So we can really, again, a very simplistic view of this is thinking basically about, are you go, are you caution, are you in a stop mode? And if we look at that from a risk level perspective, then what we get is this sort of diagram. And again, the scale here really isn't important. It's more the idea of saying risk level is never going to be 0. It's dynamic. It's constantly changing. And we have to be constantly observing our environment and what's going on to be attuned to how it might be changing. A simple example of that is weather. You're out and it gets cloudy, and in the distance you hear thunder. And so now that there are changes in weather conditions. Depending on what that storm does, your potential risk level is starting to go up. 30 minutes later, suddenly it's sunny again, and that's changed. So we're always trying to be monitoring this to assess whether we need to change our behavior, change our program activities or plans based on where things are and where we're comfortable being. So in order to sort of identify how this risk level is created, what we need to do is look at what are the hazards that are out there that end up creating those risks. So the first thing about a risk management assessment is looking at a sort of a taxonomy of what those causal factors are. And there are lots of different ones. What we're going to focus on today is one that's been around for a long time, is really looking at equipment-related hazards, environment-related hazards, and people or human factor hazards. So that is one taxonomy that you can use. But in order to do any assessment, you really have to sort of say, what buckets am I looking at to sort of think about where these hazards are falling. And in that each of those areas in the taxonomy, what you're going to do is identify hazards which can increase either the probability that something's going to happen or the severity if it does, or both. And so those are the particular things that we're looking at. And we can think of these hazards as balls. They have a certain size and weight. And the larger that ball is, the bigger the impact. So kind of looking at this diagram, you know, we see that there are a bunch of balls in the equipment category, in the environment category, and in the people category. So the more balls we have on the left side, the more that is going to push the risk level to the right. Now that doesn't mean you're going to have an accident or have an incident. Just means that the probability is increasing and the potential severity is there. So that risk score is going up. I could be in a situation where I'm at a cliff and there is rock fall, and the rock could get kicked off the top of the cliff and land 20 feet away from me. So nothing actually happened. But the level of risk for rock fall is really the same, whether I'm standing right underneath it and get hit by it, and if I'm 20 feet away. The fact that all the conditions were right for rock fall at that location means that the risk level is high. One is an adverse outcome, and the other is a near miss. And again, you can imagine the rock could land a foot away from me, and you know, it doesn't have to be 20 feet away. So what we're trying to do is get a sense of what the actual risk level is. That's what we should be dealing with, not basing it just on, oh, well, what happened? Or if it didn't happen, therefore it must have been okay, it must have been safe. So in terms of hazard factors, we can go and look at environmental hazards, and we go in and think of a whole bunch of things that are potential environmental hazards in a situation. And I'm coming from an outdoor perspective, so I tend to think about those things. But it is also critical to really think about the environment that you're in, and what is that environment, what does that mean? For example, we are obviously dealing in our society with, you know, a range of situations in which young people and children have been sexually abused in camp settings by coaches, team doctors, all sorts of things. And so one of the environmental hazards, for example, is an adult in a room alone with a child. And so when you're thinking about hazards, you need to think in a very global way about saying, you know, what is it that actually defines environmental hazards, and what are the things that we need to be thinking about? Equipment hazards, again, we could spend a lot of time on this, but we're going to hop through it. You know, it's about the equipment that you have. Is it the right stuff? Is there something wrong with it? And finally, the human factor hazards, or people for shorthand, all of the different things that might be part of this equation. So you can spend a lot of time really diving into the taxonomy of each of these things for the activities and the programs that you run, and make lists of, well, what are these potential hazards? And that's a really good exercise. So let's look as an example of how the size of a hazard factor can really change the risk level. So for high altitude, if you're going up to high altitude, there are a number of medical conditions that can happen. Mild altitude sickness, which is not very severe, and then pulmonary and cerebral edema, which both can be life-threatening illnesses. So when we think about running a trip, for example, at high altitude, if we're going up to, say, 10,000 feet, then the chances of the more serious medical conditions happening at 10,000 feet are actually very low. And so at 10,000 feet, this is not a really big hazard ball. if you go, for example, to 18,000 feet, then things like pulmonary edema and cerebral edema, the life-threatening conditions, are very likely. And so suddenly you have a huge hazard ball here. And so obviously the only thing that's changed is the actual altitude. So being able to sort of understand that in some situations a hazard can be minimal and can also suddenly become gigantic. And in the situation, for an example, where we were hiking up and, let's say we're doing a trek in the Andes in Peru and we're climbing higher and higher each day, depending on how we acclimatize, if we're not doing that in a thoughtful way, we're actually increasing every day that we go up and we're getting to higher altitudes, we're also slowly watching that risk level go up. So that's sort of how to think about it from a dynamic perspective. So if we need to manage risk, then how do we reduce the risk level? What can we do to sort of manage that risk level? And the first thing to do is to be able to look at what those hazard factors are. What are those contributing factors? Is there anything that we can do to either eliminate them or to reduce their size? So that's really the first step. How can we intervene at the hazard level itself? And then to ask yourself, well, if that's not enough, now what are my options? So the next part of it is to say, okay, what safety factors can I add in? What are the mitigating factors that I can add into the situation? And again, using the same taxonomy, if we think about equipment, environment, and people, then there are balls that we can add in to this side of the equation. And so obviously the more safety balls we add in on this side, that's going to tend to drive the risk level down. And those safety balls might be addressing the probability that something is going to happen, or the severity if it does, or both. And just as there can be very small and large hazard balls, the same thing with the safety balls. They can be, have a minor impact, or they can have a really significant impact. And so in terms of doing an analysis of this and saying, what are our mitigating factors, you're trying to weigh what those things are that you can put in the mix to manage this. So if we look at the whole picture, this is really what we get. We get a dynamic system where balls on the left side are going to increase our risk level, and balls on the right side are going to help decrease it. And so our strategy is really managing what's happening to deal with the changing risk level and keep it at something that's comfortable for us. Right now, what we have with COVID-19 is we are overwhelmed on the left side. And so what we have done, most programs, is basically step outside of doing things in the outdoors. We're doing things virtually because the issues, there are so many balls over there that we can't do anything about, then it's simply not possible to operate programs as usual. And so one of the things that will happen over time will be the actual health-related dangers will decrease. And then one of the questions that we're all going to need to deal with is, just like we're seeing the sort of flattening of the curve, the anxiety level of people participating in activities will extend beyond the period when it's safe to go back and do things. So it's going to take a while for people to be, okay, I'm willing to go to the grocery store now. I'm willing to go back to school, but am I actually willing to go on an outdoor trip and be in the backcountry yet? We're going to see a lag between when people are willing to step into other things and go back into traveling, etc. So here's a quick example of looking about how this plays out. So if we imagine a situation where we have bees as an environmental hazard, and we have somebody on the trip as a human factor or people hazard who is severely allergic to bees, then you can imagine what's happening to the risk level. It's going way up. Now, in this case, this is one of those situations where there is nothing we can do about any of those two hazard balls. We can't remove them, and we sure can't make either of them smaller. They are simply with us for the entire program that we're on. So knowing that this is something that could create a life-threatening situation, our only option is to think of the safety factors that we can add, the mitigating factors. So we're going to carry epinephrine from an equipment standpoint. We're going to carry Benadryl or Zyrtec. And the other piece is we're going to have adequate first aid training for our staff so that they can recognize the difference between a local and a systemic reaction, and they're trained on how to give an EpiPen. And that's going to reduce the risk level. In this case, it can't change the probability at all. If this person gets stung, they get stung. And there's nothing we can do to change the probability of that. What we can do is address the severity if it happens. So by having these safety balls on the right side, we have tools to make sure that this is not a life-threatening situation. We can control that. And obviously, we've got to deal with medical follow-up, evacuation, and all sorts of other things. It doesn't just end once we give an EpiPen. So thinking about your overall risk management approach, your goal is to reduce the probabilities that things are going to happen, the severities, or both. And so the steps that you're going to do in the risk assessment safety management model are really identifying those hazard factors. And a lot of that is things that you want to be able to do before you send people out on a program. You want to have that be part of your staff training. You want to have that be things that are understood and known as much as possible. And then this is also something that instructors are going to use in the field when they're dealing with a situation. They're going to look out and say, what are these hazard factors in my environment right now? What is happening? What is the risk level? And is it going up or not? What can I do about that? Can I remove some of those hazard factors? And then reassess the risk level. So a lot of this, and a good, good sort of parallel for teaching staff is for folks who've been through first aid training to think about the patient assessment system. What do you do in the patient assessment system? You walk in, you do a scene size up, and you say, what's going on? And then you take a set of vitals, and you assess where your patient is. And then you provide some treatment, and you take another set of vitals, and you say, wow, have we helped this situation at all? And if not, then you're going to say, well, what are the safety factors that I can add in? And all of those things you're going to do, and then you're going to assess the risk level again. And at that point, you've got to make a decision. Have I brought this down to a level that I'm comfortable with, or that we believe is acceptable, a level of negative R for our program? So then the question is, what happens if the risk level is still high? You've done all the things that you can, and you still, or your staff don't feel comfortable. And again, that's exactly what we're dealing with right now. And that's understanding, knowing when to bail out. And what does bailing out mean? Bailing out basically means we are not going to continue with the plan that we had originally laid out. We are going to do something different. And that's what we've all done right now. In terms of my students, when they're on the trail, if they are if they hit really severe weather, I think it's really important for them to understand that bailing out of a trip is an acceptable choice. We had a trip go down to West Virginia one year in October. Weather was supposed to be fine. They hike in 2 miles, camp. They wake up the next morning. It's 30 degrees, and there's 6 inches of snow on the ground. And they don't have warm enough gear for that conditions. And they decided to turn around and hike back to the van, and they left. And that was a great decision. They simply could not have done that trip safely with the gear that they had. people would have been hypothermic and gotten frostbite. So it's really important within a culture of the program to have bailing out be acceptable. That is something that you want to encourage people to make good decisions and not feel driven for whatever reason that they have to do something just to make it to the next checkpoint or whatever. So again, this is sort of looking at the total model. And this model is really what we think about in the context of what's been defined as safety 1. So safety 1 and safety 2 is really a model that was developed by Holnagel, Hearns, and Braithwaite back in 2013. And they said that the safety 1 model, which is really the model that most of us have used for decades, is looking at where as few things as possible go wrong. And the idea behind this is that, you know, there are those hazard factors out there. There are failures or malfunctions. Some of those may be human related. And those are the things that increase risk level and cause accidents. So the approach of safety 1 is to identify those things and either eliminate the causes, so reduce the hazard balls, improve the barriers, improve your safety balls, or both. And that's been a foundational part of risk management for a long, long time. So the next sort of stage of this, which actually is sort of predates the safety 1 and safety 2 definitions, is work done by Jens Rasmussen. And Rasmussen wrote a paper in 1997 that really sort of took safety 1 and added a whole systems approach to it. And the systems approach that he defined is the notion that that risk management is a vertical system, that we tend, and when we look at those hazards, we tend to be focusing on what people sometimes call the sharp end of the stick. Okay, we go to the program delivery end itself, and we look at the instructor in the field and what they did or didn't do, and what the participants did or didn't do, and that's where things went wrong. And Rasmussen said that's a really limited view. Yes, things went wrong there, but what you need to do is not just to stop at that immediate end and say, let's fix the things that went wrong. This instructor didn't follow this protocol, so we have to do twice as much training on that protocol, and then say, okay, we've solved the problem. But Rasmussen said that actual adverse events and near misses are not caused by single things. They're caused by multiple things happening at different levels within a system. And so if you're going to change things, you have to look at it systemically. You have to look at the entire vertical system. So what we're going to do is take a look at how this plays out in Rasmussen's approach through what are called Acci-maps. And so an Acci-map is really looking at what the contributing factors are at each level in the system and the relationships between them which create a negative outcome. So the first thing to do in terms of building an Acci-map is determining what the levels of your system are, then identifying those contributing factors, those hazard balls that are happening at each level, and then think about how those balls relate to each other. And then it's possible to build a map showing that web of relationships, and it's that web that is ultimately leading to the problem. So if you just deal with one piece of the web, you're not solving the whole thing. So let's look at sort of building an Acci-map. You know, at first, if we have some adverse event, we first typically look at the work and activity. We look at the equipment and environment, and we identify what the sort of contributing factors are at that level. And then we tend to look at the participants and the staff. What was the activity, the physical process, And in safety one, that's been about as far as we've gone. And we've said, wow, we need to go in and fix some of those things, and then our problem is solved. Rasmussen said, you've got to look higher than that. First, you have to look at how these things relate to each other. So how did one factor lead to another? Then he said, you've got to look at the supervision and management. So if a staff person made a decision that related in, that resulted in an adverse outcome, you have to look higher in the staff. What are the contributing factors up there, okay? What was the training like? What was the vetting and screening of this staff person? Were they teaching a course that was at the appropriate level for them? That's not the staff person's responsibility to determine. That's supervision and management. Then you've got to sort of go up another level. What's happening at the company level? What's the company culture and management? How are contributing factors there influencing what supervisors are doing? Are you under pressure to do a certain number of participant days every year? Are you stressed in terms of the staff that you're hiring and you can't find enough qualified staff? So do you change the level of programming are you doing? Or you just keep doing the things that you've always been doing, even though your staff are now effectively undertrained in relation to your activities? So what's happening at the company level? Above that, what about regulatory bodies and associations? What are their policies and practices? And how do those things trickle down into these other levels of things? What about government? What levels of things are happening in terms of government policy, budgeting, etc.? How do those play out? So Rasmussen sort of said, you can't just look at the single judgment mistake that was made by the instructor and say, that's our problem, we have to solve that. The other thing that was really important about Rasmussen's work is he said, if you look at this from a systems approach, you step away from the blame model of like, whose fault was this? Because ultimately you're saying the entire system failed. That it's not just one element, but there are a whole bunch of things that led to that failure. And if you're going to solve it, you can't just sit there and say, oh, well, we have to discipline the staff member and retrain them. You may have to do that, but you also need to look at where are all the other things that contributed to that being possible. So that's really Rasmussen's approach. So we're going to take a quick shot at a video. This is from the Mangatapopo tragedy that took place in New Zealand. This was back in 2008, and 6 students and a teacher drowned in a canyoning accident at the Sir Edmund Hillary Outdoor Center. And this is a news report from the night of that event. And this is sort of the nightmare scenario for any of us that we would be dealing with something like this.
A search is still underway for students from Elim Christian School in Auckland who were swept away while canyoning down a central North Island river. The river is the Mangatipopo between Turangi and Ngaruahui. Dan Parker has been finding out more and he joins us live from the Auckland newsroom. Dan, what can you tell us?
Hi Sam. Well, 4 of the 7 students have been found dead, 2 remain missing, and we are getting reports that 1 has been found alive. The latest from police is that poor weather in the central Waikato is still hampering their efforts and affecting communications equipment, but they will continue to search throughout the night and hope to get a helicopter up with night vision. The students were from the Sir Edmund Hillary Outdoor Pursuit Centre and were caught out canyoning in the flood-swollen Mangatipopo River north of Turangi. Earlier this evening, family and friends of the missing students met at Elim Christian College, where they spoke with the school principal, Murray Burton, and prayed for the safe return of the missing students. In a sad twist, it's understood that they were due back from their camp tonight.
Dan, thank you. A search is...
So following that incident, and one of the reasons that I picked this incident is it's one of the most well-studied incident. There was a 50-page coroner's report that was issued subsequent to this that really looked at all of the sort of contributing factors in this particular incident. And so it makes for a really informative read. If you search for Mangatapopo Coroner's Report, you'll find it. So let's sort of use this as our proxy for sort of looking at Rasmussen's sort of Acci-map model in this situation. So we know what the adverse event was, and we can look here at just some of the things that were at play. So from the very top, there was a lack of legislation at the government level for how outdoor education centers were supposed to operate. And so as a result of that, there wasn't a particular auditing system for seeing how programs would operate. And in a lot of places in the outdoor education industry in the US, there aren't auditing systems either. But for some programs, there are. Some climbing walls in certain states are administered under amusement park regulatory acts. Summer camps typically always have camp safety regulations that they have to follow. So in some situations, there may be government rules and regulations and some kind of system to audit and make sure that you're in compliance. In this case, those things, the lack of legislation led to a lack of auditing. And so the consent form at the company level wasn't adequate. It didn't ask questions about what's your level of swimming ability for the participants. And it also, they had an inadequate employee training and mentoring program. So they sent an inexperienced instructor, a single instructor on a trip that was basically a day trip, like right at the center. They go a couple miles up from the center, there's a canyon right there, and they hike down the canyon and they end up at the center. And there was rain and a flash flood further away. The canyon flooded, and then in the midst of this flood, the single instructor didn't have the experience to deal with it. But going into it, they were told, hey, this is a trip you're leading today. They assumed that they were competent. So that inadequate consent form meant that there were people who were not good swimmers in the group. So these are just some of the ways that you can see in the sort of Acci-map approach how all of these factors can chain together. And so it's not just looking at a single factor of the instructor, it's thinking about all the other things in their relationships. And this is the Acci-map that was done of the full incident. And you know, it's too complicated to read on the screen, but the big takeaway here is look how many things there are and look how many arrows lead from one thing to another thing. So there are a whole bunch of issues here. It's not just the instructor. And so Rasmussen's, you know, incredible contribution is helping us think about a systems approach to risk management, that we really need to look at these different vertical hierarchy levels and think about how we address risk management by attending to all of these things. So this has been the traditional safety one approach. And going back to our sort of iceberg metaphor, we're kind of looking at the top. We're looking at the bad stuff that happens. What's going wrong? And safety two, what safety two basically says is, rather than spending all our time focusing on how to keep things from going wrong, why not focus on how do we get everything to go right? And that's really what Holnagel, Hearns, and Braithwaite came to, and that's the particular lens that they have brought into this equation. So the safety two approach is saying, well, most of our programs work fine, okay? So let's look at what we're not looking at. Let's look at all of the positive elements which make our programs actually successful. And this is just a graphic of safety one versus safety two based on some aviation data. And if you look at the number of accidents that you have and you put it out over a bell curve, you'll see on the left the actual times that we have bad stuff happen is really a small percentage of our normal activity load. And most of what we do happens in the middle of the bell curve. and it's fine. Things are safe and things are running okay. And there are also some things on the far right side where they're running perfectly. But if we only take the safety one approach, then we're always just focusing all our energy on the problems and not on our successes. So one of the ways to sort of lay out the difference between safety one and safety two is sort of thinking about how are we learning? What are we focusing on? Okay. A reactive approach in safety one versus being proactive and focusing on different aspects of things. So safety two is really an important sort of new thinking process in risk management, but we want to use both. It's not an either or. Safety one is still a foundational part of your risk management process. But what you really want to do is be thinking about how we think about both of these things, how we incorporate both into our programming. So we're really getting the biggest part of the stack as possible. We're looking at everything. So one of the ways to think about safety two, I run a college outdoor program. So I think about what are the things that we create within our program that leads to our success? Training, evaluation of staff, protocols, their field experience, their judgment. All of those are the safety two things. This isn't the like going back and dealing with an accident analysis and finding out what went wrong. This is looking at what's going right. And based on the size of that stack, I need to determine what the activity level bar is that I'm comfortable operating with our leaders in our program. There is always going to be a risk gap. Like we said, there's no such thing as zero risk. And I can set that activity level bar based on the safety two stuff that I have in place, and I can decide how big that gap is going to be. Now, I'm a college outdoor program, so let's say I'm a professional outdoor program like Knowles or Outward Bound. Well, they got a much bigger stack than I do. What they have in place in terms of creating successful experiences are much bigger, and within each of those buckets, you know, their instructors have much more field experience, much better judgment. They can have a much higher activity level bar than I could have. They still have a risk gap. And again, it's up to each program to make that determination about where you want to be. So we can dive into this and looking at a particular piece. If we take the training piece and we explode that out, we can look at the different components of our training and determine what are the things that create success for us. And how do we ensure that our programs are going to operate safely by focusing on the safety two end of things. Diversity and inclusion is another critical piece, and that's a whole nother talk to get into in terms of diversity and inclusion and risk management. Physical safety is the thing that tends to occupy us most of the time. It's the thing that we think of most often. Emotional safety and creating an emotionally safe environment is equally important. It can be equally damaging and detrimental. Teens committing suicide after bullying, LGBTQ individuals being harassed. So it is equally important as you're sitting there thinking about the kinds of things that can happen on an outdoor-based trip around injuries and illnesses and tick-borne diseases, etc., to sit there and say, what are the emotional and interpersonal hazards that are out there? And what do we need to do in order to address those? So if we sort of think about an Acci-map as mapping out an accident and determining what went wrong, and then identifying intervention strategies, we can think about a Preventi-map as an analysis of mitigation strategies of saying what went right. And then how can we sort of think about and focus on the things that we need to ensure are there in order to operate. And that's really a big part of the decision-making process that we're all going to need to do about COVID-2. We're going to need to decide what pieces need to be in place and we can count on in order to decide when we're going to return to programming. So I'm going to sort of start by saying I come from a higher education background, and so the example that I'm going to use is Title IX. And let me say from the outset, Title IX is not a perfect system in any way. But having been involved in higher education for 40 years, I can remember being on a Take Back the Night march in the 80s and hiking by Fraternity Row and having a bunch of people from a fraternity yelling out, "We can rape whoever we want." So that was the environment then. And I can definitely say that on our college campus, it's a heck of a lot better now. And I'm not an apologist for Title IX because there's huge problems with it. But if you think about what this means from a preventive map sort of approach, people from the ground up said, we have a huge problem on campus. We need legislation. And so that came up from victims advocates, and governments decided to implement legislation about Title IX. The Department of Education is the one that implements Title IX, so they do the auditing. That trickles down to colleges and universities that have to implement policies and procedures about how we're going to deal with and adjudicate Title IX cases. It also led to campus education programs. We have a sexual harassment advising research education office whose job is for peer counselors to connect with students around sexual assault and harassment. Students are taught how to manage inappropriate sexual remarks and contact in our programs. And every first-year student goes through an online training about how to deal with consent and sexual harassment. So, is it a perfect system? Absolutely not. But this is an example of a preventing map where you're really looking at what are the things that we could do to put in place to sort of say, from this point on, we feel like we can operate if we have these things in place. An example, in COVID-2 is, we are doing things, frontline healthcare workers are doing things they never thought would be appropriate. The idea of having 2 patients on a ventilator or using CPAP machines or reusing PPE, those are policies and protocols from 3 months ago. And if 3 months ago before this, you had been advocating to put 2 people on a ventilator, you would have been fired from an ICU. Now it's like, we're dealing with whatever we can, and we're going to make the best of it. And a lot of what the Safety 2 approach is really saying, Safety 2 looks at what is the context at the moment and what does staff need to do to be able to make it work. And so that's, rather than looking at penalizing people for changing protocols, we have to be applauding people who are being unbelievably inventive to make this work. So when we think about the decision premises, I would postulate that the first thing we've got to think about is participant and client safety and staff safety, and organizational safety is third. If we can't create an environment that's safe for our participants and staff, if we send them out into an environment that we know is inherently unsafe, we won't have an organization for very long. So that's got to be our premise. And so one of the things, I'm going to just sort of change slides here. I'm going to do a quick stop share, and I'm going to share a different screen. And Sherry, let me know if you're not seeing the diagram screen. But this is a decision tree that we have come to use. We put this together 2 days ago to be thinking about how we make a decision if we're going to go through and do our normal outdoor orientation program in the fall. And the first thing is saying, are people allowed to be within 6 feet of each other? And if the answer to that is yes, then the next question is, what's the group size? If we can have 10 to 15 people in a group, then conceivably our program might be able to operate. If not, we're done. We can't go into the backcountry with our programmatic mission and leaders, et cetera, the way we operate. Then the next question is screening possible? When all those trip leaders and first-year students arrive back on campus, just having traveled from all over the world, are we going to be able to screen them for COVID? Are we going to know that they are not just asymptomatic, but they are not carrying COVID-19? If we decide that we can do that, then the question is, are the parks open? Are the trails open? Can we actually go out into the backcountry? Is bus transportation possible? So even though the group size might be 10 to 15, if we can't put 50 people on the bus, which is how we move people around, then again, bus transportation is not possible. We're done. We're stopped at that point. If bus transportation is possible, will students, both leaders and participants, be comfortable riding on that bus? Okay, can we do that from a standpoint of emotional safety and have people feel like, yeah, I'm willing to do that? If so, and we actually can achieve that, what about the hygiene and distancing practices? What's required for where we are? And is that manageable in the field? We sleep under a single tarp. We cook together. What are those things? Are those things possible? And so maybe we could send people out for day hikes, and they could keep enough distance, but we simply can't have them be in an overnight situation because we can't maintain proper social distancing. If we can manage that in the field, can we make sure that we have an appropriate response if a student becomes ill? If somebody starts to show a fever on the trip, what happens? Can we provide an adequate response for the patient? Can we provide them with adequate medical care and support? What about the group? Are they all going to panic and say, oh my gosh, I need to be evacuated? What would that mean for overloading local health resources? We typically have other students who have minivans in the field. If somebody has a fever, will they be willing to pick that person up and drive them to a clinic to get checked out? Or will they say, no, you're not going to put them in a van where they're not 6 feet away from me? So you can see that this is sort of taking sort of safety too, and trying to say, what are all the things that we would need to have in place in order to create this particular level of experience? And the other issue is also thinking about what can potentially go wrong. So even if all these things, all these green boxes are checked, we could still be in a situation where if we have 5 people on 5 different trips get fevers, even if it's not COVID, even if it's just some kind of a minor virus, but we have to evac the entire group every time because everybody is really agitated, that could overwhelm our system. We typically have to evac some people every year because somebody, comes in and has flu-like symptoms, and we pick them up and bring them back to campus. But if that was happening at a gigantic level, that might overwhelm us. So we could get all the way through and say yes, 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 and then finally decide, you know what, the probability of huge numbers of evacs is beyond what we are prepared to handle. So basically, if we're not allowed to be within 6 feet, or if we start to fail at any of these points, we're probably looking at either a campus-only based program where we just do things on campus and walk to nearby outdoor spaces where we can be spread out, or we have to do a virtual-only program. So this is a kind of tool that I would advocate people sort of thinking about as you're trying to think about the decisions about when you move back to full programming. And that other piece that I mentioned before was also just keeping in mind that even though all of these things might be in place, the emotional readiness of participants and parents or guardians for people to go into the backcountry may lag behind them. So I think we're all going to have to deal with shifting to think about what are the core missions of our programs and how can we accomplish them in different venues, and so that we can deliver as much as possible, and as things slowly evolve, to slowly work ourselves back up. So I'll sort of shift back, stop this share and shift back. So in terms of the slides, the big things, takeaways for today are thinking about how you can deal with probability severity, looking at each activity that you do and do an assessment of the hazard factors and the safety factors that you have at play, and then be able to assess that risk level and ask yourself, do we feel comfortable? What are those risk levels? And obviously, we are so overloaded on the hazard side right now with COVID, you know, we're gonna have to wait till some of those balls disappear or get smaller until we can even imagine going back. And then I think also thinking about how we collect incident data to be able to go in and be able to build out sort of Acci-maps based on that. So incident data collection is primarily sort of safety one focused for looking at how you address those issues. And then thinking as you look at COVID to say, what are the systems that we would want to have in place to feel comfortable within our organization, moving back into a level of programming. And so thinking back to that risk gap and activity bar, you're going to look at the stack that you have in place, and you're going to obviously decide on a much lower activity bar initially than what we typically do. And as some of those hazard factors disappear, then you're going to be able to continue to reevaluate and say, okay, we're ready to move up a notch in terms of our activity level. So there are a bunch of take-home action steps. We're over a little bit, so I'm just going to kind of leave these you know, up on the screen for a second, and all of this will be in the PowerPoint that we'll send out to you afterwards, so you can follow up on these things on your own. The big thing that is always, and we are seeing this play out right now, there are a lot of mistakes that have been made, and when this is done, we're going to need to go back and both as a nation and as the world, look at what happened and say, how does this not happen again? There is nothing that we can do right now that is going to erase the tragedies that have already happened and that will continue to happen. So what is more tragic is if we don't do anything about it afterwards. That would be the biggest tragedy of all. And so I think it's important and incumbent upon all of us to make sure that there is a learning process. There is a longer version of this that's available up on outdoorad.com.
Rick,
if you want to take a look.
Your screen isn't sharing. Can you share the slide you were talking about? That's okay, no worries.
Where am I? Let me go back to screen share from the current slide.
I didn't want to interrupt you when you were.
Oh no, no worries, no worries.
Poignant point there.
I have to find where my little Zoom thing is not showing up. So Sherry, if there are, I know people probably need to get off, so if there are Q&A things, I'm happy to sort of stay around and answer Q&A things. So here's our final thought.
Great.
And there is a version of a train-to-trainers version of the RASM model that's the PowerPoint and video up on outdoored.com, and information about incident data tracking and incident analytics. And so you can search YouTube for those downloads. Sherry, thanks very much to you and AEE for inviting me to be part of the webinar series.
Rick, thank you so much. This was great. We do have a lot of questions in the Q&A, and so I know some people will want to hang around for that, but if you need to get off, we understand that too. Everybody's time is valuable, and we appreciate everyone being here this afternoon. We will be sending out the recording and the PowerPoint presentation to everyone who registered. You'll also be able to find it on our website at www.ae.org. Anna's put that in the chat a couple different times. And all of our webinars are available on that website, as well as the full resource library. There'll be, we keep adding new information. So thank you all so much for joining. And as you go about your lives, make sure if you need something from AE, let us know. We are happy to help, and we are trying to connect people and make a difference during this time. So thank you very much. Rick, I'll just go ahead and read some questions, and then if you want to respond to them, that
Well,
might...
I have the Q&A window up.
Great.
So I can, and so I'll just sort of go down the list, and for people who want to stay on.
Great.
So one question was, how do you define risk levels and determine where you are on the scale? And so what I would say is the best answer to that is if you look at the other more detailed YouTube video, it goes into talking about how to actually determine those risk levels more on a numeric level. So I would just point you to that. What risk issues related to COVID-19 do you foresee programs having to deal with? Some of those are the ones that I sort of showed you in that decision tree diagram. And I think, you know, a lot of that would depend on the particular program. So for example, you know, we have a climbing wall on campus. You know, when are we going to be able to open our climbing wall? And one of the answers to that is, you know, trying to clean climbing wall holds, you know, cleaning a whole climbing wall is an unbelievably difficult thing to do. And so at some level, you know, some kinds of activities may just be on hold for an extended period of time until we actually have more control over this disease. You know, it's one thing to go to a gymnasium and, you know, require everybody to wipe down the gym equipment, you know, in between, you know, using the elliptical. But it's just not feasibly possible to wipe down every climbing hold after somebody goes up a route. So I think that there are lots of different things, but I think the big things that you know we're thinking of obviously are issues related to distance, issues related to hygiene and cleaning equipment, obviously issues related to PPE. What kind of PPE would we need to be able to provide on the trips themselves? And the other question is, you know, does that take PPE away from the healthcare industry that needs it more than we do? A big question is also, what is the current status of, in the areas that you're traveling to, what is the load on the healthcare system? And obviously one of the reasons that people have been told not to go into the backcountry right now is that if you get hurt and you're in some remote place, you're potentially overloading a healthcare system that does not have capacity. So I think not only do we have to ask ourselves programmatic questions about the issues, we also have to ask ourselves really societal questions about, this is a leave no trace kind of thing. Like, what is the minimal impact that we can have by going out? And it's no longer just about the trash that we leave or don't leave on the trail. It's about a lot of other impacts that we can have on hard-hit areas. Another question about, do you think there's value to rewriting liability and risk waivers to include issues related to COVID-19? And I would say the answer to that is there was a good webinar that was done, AE webinar, I think it was last week, with Steve Smith and Kathy Hansen-Stamp. That's a legal question, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not qualified to be able to give you an opinion one way or another about that. And you know, I think it's really, you really need to talk to somebody, you know, within your particular jurisdiction, the state that you're in, whether it's your legal counsel for your organization or your college or university, or your insurance carrier, to sort of say, what do they think about that? So I'm gonna have to pass on that one. So if there's a program that provides a wide range of activity types, paddling, snowshoeing, mountain biking, is an Acci-map needed or should be created for each of the activity types, or one can be created as a general system? And I would say the answer is both. So there are obviously unique issues related to each of those things. And you know, I think when you're building an Acci-map, you're thinking about things like instructor training, you know, protocols, procedures, how we're marketing our program, what the company culture is. Those, I think, are really generic in terms of being able to build an Acci-map that says we are doing outdoor related activities. You know, so I take that back. That's useful from a preventing map standpoint, because you're looking at you know, what's best within that particular situation. When you're thinking about an Acci-map, you're obviously thinking about more looking back at a specific incident, and you're sitting there saying, okay, we did a whitewater trip, and the group left the throw bags behind and did not have any throw bags. Okay, so now you're sitting there looking at a post-incident, either a close call or an actual accident, and you're saying, wow, we needed a rescue. Turned out we didn't have a throw bag. Person swam ashore anyway, and it was okay. But boy, they just made it above that bad drop. And if they had gone over that drop, it would have been really bad. So I think in an Acci-map, you're really having to look at the specific activity, because glacier travel and paddling, those are all so different. The analysis of what those things are also going to be very sort of specifically related to that activity. So, you know, again, I would say, you know, if you think about a preventive map, it's definitely very generic to say the kinds of things that lead to success in all of our programs. And when you're analyzing what are the hazards related to mountain biking, what are those hazard balls that I need to be prepared for? What safety balls should I have in place? That's going to be a different analysis than snowshoeing or paddling. Now, you don't necessarily need to do an Acci-map for each thing. You know, you can sit there and generate what are the hazards of mountain biking, what are those things that are most likely to occur, or what have we seen occur to date, and say to yourself, you know, what mitigating factors do we need to have in place to deal with that? And, you know, you can do that as a paper and pencil exercise without necessarily building out a whole Acci-map. The Acci-map tends to happen more when you actually are dealing with a specific event and you're trying to get a really good analysis of all of the things that happen in that event. Somebody asked about seeing the value in rewriting policies and procedures to include information about appropriate measures to decrease the spread of COVID-19. And I think my recommendation on that is, you know, we all have to be guided by the science and what health professionals are telling us within, you know, our particular states. Again, I'm not a physician, so I think right now it's such a moving target. I think the idea of trying to write protocols right now, who knows what they will be, you know, in 2 months from now. I was on a phone call this morning with a software developer I work with who lives in Belgium, and Belgium is starting to open up on May 7th, and they're allowing limited stuff to happen. And it looks like June 8th, they're actually going to do a larger opening up. So there's some big announcement happening today. So, again, it's such a moving target. I think, and that's what makes this so difficult, is that, it's really difficult to make decisions because it's so unclear what's going to happen. A question about when you'll make our decision. Many programs are having to decide by May 1 to 15th. That's from Rita Yerkes. And yeah, I think we are, at Princeton University, we are being driven by what the institution, is thinking about it wants to do. And we don't have guidance on that yet. So we're sort of in the dark, waiting for the university to decide what's going to be happening. I think one of the things that we're seeing, at least at the university level, is decisions are being made in this very sequential way. So Princeton first had to decide whether there was going to be on-campus graduation. And it was only about a week ago that they decided to officially say that that was not going to happen. And then last week it was decided that there would be no summer programs on campus, and that the earliest date that students would be allowed to return and live on campus is August 15th. We still don't know what that means about the actual fall semester. That decision is still under study. So I think in a lot of environments, if you're part of a larger organization like a university, most of these decisions are totally out of your hands. And at some point, somebody's going to say, we're open at this level. And then you're going to have to decide, okay, what can I do at that level? And working backwards, I think realistically, if we couldn't have students on campus till August 15th, when I think about the trip planning, the menus, the equipment that needs to be inventoried and packed, and our trips leave 5 days after that, it seems pretty difficult that we would be able to pull that off. But that's not a decision for me to make, and I am definitely not announcing or making any decision on this webinar. That's for people above my pay grade. And so, but I'm really looking at it from a realistic standpoint of, I know what needs to happen in order to pull this off. And I think within each of our programs, we know what the ramp up is. And so I think at some point you look at that and you look at the time period and the things that need to be done. And in some ways that makes decisions for you. So back to Rita's thing about May 1 to May 15, on the university. And, I think a lot of those decisions will need to be made around then, because students are matriculating and somebody's going to need to tell them whether they're supposed to show up on campus in the fall or not. But right now, everybody's scrambling to make those decisions. For people who are involved in college outdoor orientation programs, there is a group of us led by Brent Bell with the University of New Hampshire, and we have Zoom meetings every Mondays at 3, and we are having these conversations every week, like what's happening on your campus, how could we pull this off virtually, all that kind of stuff. So, and there's also been there's another question about how people are replacing outdoor activities with virtual training. There's another good AEE video that was done a couple of weeks ago about virtual training stuff. And this is all brand new to all of us, trying to figure out how we shift gears into a totally different modality, and particularly around the experiential learning side of things. There is the Wilderness Medical Society is doing a webinar. It's a paid webinar. You have to pay for it. It's on May 6th, but you can go and look up on their site. one of the wilderness medicine providers, I think, is doing it. And they're talking about how to run virtual first aid training, how to do simulations, et cetera. So, you know, I'm potentially going to attend because I'm desperately trying to figure this out myself. You know, what pieces of training can we do virtually, and how do we bring an experiential component in? So if people are particularly interested in that on the first aid side, that might be something to check out. Oh, let's see, other questions here. I saw a question from Chris White. Chris, hey, how are you? But now I can't find the question. Have we done a risk management assessment for any outdoor program as it relates to COVID-19 and summer programming? So I think that question, relates a little bit to that flow chart that I did. And so I would definitely say that that's a useful exercise to try to go through to sort of see what the decision points are, and then really to flesh out in more detail at each of those nexus points, what are all the sub things that you would need to have in place to feel comfortable moving on. Equipment, tent, sleeping bags, backpacks, can they be loaned out safely? And that's another big question. And I think one of the questions that we have is also what is our capacity after the trips come back to be able to deal with all that stuff? We send out almost 800 people, and you know, if we have to sanitize every single piece of gear that comes back, and we do it with all student volunteers who come back and 2 days later in classes, I don't see how we would do it. So one option is, do you throw everything in a warehouse or in a truck and let it sit there for a week and say, you know what, whatever was on it is gone now. And so part of it is assessing the capacity at the other end. And that's the kind of thing where you might say we have a whole bunch of green check boxes, but our gear comes in and we're a program that operates every week. We only have 24 hours between groups to turn this gear around. And you might decide, wow, there's no way I can pull that off. And so maybe you say, okay, if we no longer do programs back to back, but if we have to schedule 5 days in between each program to allow our staff to do the cleaning, then we could operate. And we're going to operate at a reduced level. And then you got to ask yourself the question, do we have the proper PPE, et cetera? Can we keep our staff safe cleaning this stuff? Is that appropriate? So, you know, every time you get to one of these decision juncture points, you've got to ask yourself a series of other questions and be able to say, yep, we can do X and Y and Z. That means that, yeah, we can keep going down this path. And so, Chris, I was definitely not to safety conscious back in 1976. Question about reducing the subjectiveness to assessing risk levels. What an instructor would be able to manage in the field is a combination of certificate and experience. So, you know, one of the things to do is trying to think about the sophistication of your staff, and there are a variety of different tools. The National Park Service has an app that you can download that there's sort of risk management assessment tool. Ross Cloutier also has one. I can't remember what his app is called. Ross has done a lot of the major work in Canada on risk management assessment in the Canadian parks. And so there are ways to put numbers to this. You know, just like for people who are aware of backcountry avalanche things, there are grades of systems that help you sort of say what the risk level is of going in the backcountry, what the avalanche level is. So, you know, it is difficult to create a universal quantifiable system about these things. So at some level, doing something like this is low, medium, or high I find is something that my students can grapple with. They're looking at a flooded creek and they're assessing the speed of the water, the depth, how far it is, etc. And they can kind of come up with an assessment of saying, well, so this is the probability of somebody getting swept downstream is low, medium, or high. And they can look and say, well, if they get swept downstream, are there strainers down below there? Is there a waterfall? Or would they just like drift for a long ways? They can kind of go, yeah, so the severity, if they did get swept off their feet, is low, medium, and high. And sometimes that's enough of a scale to allow somebody to make decisions. People who are really experts in the field are basing these things on years of experience, where they look at an avalanche slope and they're categorizing all sorts of decisions about snow conditions and weather and remoteness and all sorts of things. So they're able to use much more sophisticated systems. So that's the best I can sort of answer, in terms of that question. Certain college outdoor leadership programs, degree seeking might be somewhat constrained by what the college deems as appropriate or safe for students, which may differ from what I feel is safe and appropriate for my outdoor leadership students, specifically based on the types of courses that we offer. Any suggestions on how to deal with such a situation? So, having been in higher education for 40 years, I would say there's a lot of politics here. I think one of the things that we have to recognize is we are in such uncharted waters, and colleges and universities are going to be unbelievably risk averse right now. I mean, people are sitting here going, are we going to be open a year from now? When people are sitting there looking at their budgets and trying to decide whether they're going to exist as an entity or not, the idea of the outdoor program running stuff is totally off their radar. And so they are going to be super risk averse, and that's going to probably be for a while. And so the fact that you might be able to pull it off, and you've done a good analysis and you feel like, you know what, we actually can operate this safely, doesn't mean that the institution is ready for that. So that depends a lot on supervisors, departments, deans, and presidents. So, I can't sort of answer that. I think for me, it goes back to that question of saying, what is our mission? What is your mission of educating students in the outdoors? And I think my assessment is for a while, and I can't tell you what a while is, we're going to have to do that in different ways than we're used to. And the hope is that when we get through this, chomping at the bit to get back in the outdoors. But I think it's going to be a slow process. And I think it's also important for us to again think about the big picture when we're going into the outdoors and things happen. Are we putting unnecessary loads on rangers, on local health systems, all those sorts of things? I think we have bigger responsibilities we also have to think about besides just what our students need within our program. And we obviously are not going to be able to serve them as well as we have. We have to serve them as best we can. And that's the best answer. Somebody asked, how does COVID affect challenge courses? I would sort of turn that over a little bit to the ACCT, the Association of Challenge Course Technologies. I would see them as being sort of the leaders in terms of thinking about that. And in some ways, I would say it's a similar potential cleaning issue as the climbing walls, in terms of saying, wow, how do we deal with this? And a question about Alaska, part of our bear response is to group up close to one another. Yeah, absolutely. And encountering a bear decreases in the size of 10 people and also decreases when staying closer to town, but is still a possibility. Even though those chances are minimum, I'm concerned about being in a position in which I have to choose one mitigation factor over another. I'm wondering if anyone else has these concerns. From a risk management perspective, I'm concerned with the human factor of wanting or even needing to get our programs back on track and letting that affect our judgment. That's a great question. I mean, I think I talked about that a little in the previous sort of answer is, you know, there definitely are going to be parts of the country where, you know, I don't know what it's like up in Alaska, but maybe Alaska is not, you know, hit as much as other places. I would think that part of the answer to that question also might depend upon where your clientele is coming from. You know, if your participants are all from Alaska and they're all operating with that in the same, you know, sort of health context within Alaska, that's one thing. If you have people flying from all over the country who are operating, if you have somebody coming from New York City, their emotional response to being crowded together with a bunch of other people is going to be very different from somebody where, you know, there hasn't been huge outbreaks. And so I think part of that is also going to be, again, thinking back to your participants and your staff, where are they from? You know, to say, you know, yes, we could do this, you know, we can maintain distance X because that's what the state is currently saying we need to do. But there's also the comfort factor. And I think we're going to have incredible anxiety levels in society for an extended period of time. It's going to take a long time for people to de-escalate from this crisis emotionally. And that's clearly going to have an impact. And so part of the issue is also thinking about the flip side. You know, I would anticipate that, you know, if we do our outdoor orientation program in the fall, we will have more cases of anxiety and panic attack than we've had in previous years. You know, somebody starts sneezing or gets a cold, and they're going to be some of our students for whom this is a triggering event. And so are we going to need to evac those students? How are we going to respond to their needs? And knowing that that's going to increase, are we actually capable of responding to that? So that might say, you know what, maybe we need to be in only a base camp situation so that if something like that happens, you know, we can spread the group out. We can isolate the one person who's really in a high anxiety state. We don't have to keep hiking or whatever. Maybe that's what's going to be necessary in order for us to do programming. So, you know, I can't answer the specific sort of questions about bear policies and protocols, but I think, you know, part of this is again, thinking about both the health and where we've transitioned to in terms of that, but then also where we are on the anxiety spectrum for people as part of thinking about how we're going to deal with this. Let's see if there are other questions here. Hazard factors specific to COVID-19 that people are identifying for virtual programming. Is a waiver necessary for virtual programming for adults? That's a question that I would go back and listen to that webinar that Kathy Hansen-Stamp and Steve Smith did. I know that question came up. So I would refer you back to that. I think it was asked in relation to more about whether there were minors participating in the activities. And so I'll point you back to that as the best place for answering that question. In terms of international, many communities overseas are viewing U.S. citizens as high risk specific to COVID-19. It's likely that even as international borders open, smaller communities will still be uncomfortable hosting. Also here in Oregon, there have been communities specifically asking Portlanders not to travel to their towns. The ethic and optic of running programs will be a prime determination for running our programs in the fall. And that's a great observation from James. You know, that is, again, thinking of back to, I'm going to go back to, to the old term of minimal impact as compared to leave no trace. I think we have to think of how can we be out in other people's backyards and communities and not impact their health, perceived health, and perceived safety. You know, I think the values of all of our programs are about human nurturance. And so if we are going out to nurture our participants and the process of that is, you know, is somehow injuring other people and making them more anxious, it's a really good question about why we're doing that. And how we explain to our participants, hey, we're about nurturance, and what these people in town are experiencing is just too bad because we come first. That really obviously doesn't make sense in terms of what our values are. So, you know, I think smaller communities, you know, smaller mountain biking communities, rock climbing communities and stuff like that have been telling people, stay away, you know, don't come to Joshua Tree, you know, don't come to our backyard right now. We don't need you here right now. We have enough to deal with. And our health system can't handle it. Thousands of people, you know, again, for a big rock climbing mecca, you know, thousands of people from all over the country show up, you know, that's just like asking for transmission. So I think there are definitely places where you can go where you aren't necessarily impacting the community itself. Because trailheads are remote, you don't need to interact with town and the people. So I think that's a really individual decision that people are going to have to make. You know, right now, the Appalachian Trail is technically closed, and you know the AT has said, you know, Appalachian Trail Club has said people should not be on the AT, and obviously they are not policing that. They can't be out there preventing people, but it really makes sense. So let's see if there are any other questions here. We are taking our courses virtually for now, but being an experience-based organization, we are trying to give some activities, assignments that get our students out of their backyards and beyond. Backyards seem safe, but do we need to be worried about sending a student out to do an activity in a nearby park and contracting COVID and it coming back on our program? Again, that's really a legal question, and since I'm not a lawyer, I'm not going to attempt to answer that. I think that's really worth going to, you know, to your, you know, your general counsel or whoever you go to, your insurance provider for legal advice. You know, I think the general answer is, in terms of students and doing independent work is also an age-related thing. So if I am dealing with college students, I am okay with saying, you know, go out to your local park and do a nature observation and take some video and come back and share it on Flipgrid. They're over 18 and they should be capable of, you know, making their own decisions. And I wouldn't be particularly concerned about them like being someplace by themselves. Obviously, if you're talking about somebody who's a minor, you wouldn't, if they were on your program, they would have some higher level of supervision. You probably wouldn't necessarily be in some way send them off on a solo. And so if you're asking them to go off and do something that's kind of, you know, in some park, what kind of parental permission do they have? What do parents know about what you're asking people to do? So I would say there's definitely an age-related piece to this. And again, I would say, you know, the issue is, can it come back on your program, the bottom line on legal things is things can always come back on your program. People can sue you for anything. The question is whether it's valid or not. And in some cases it's not, but even if it isn't, you still may have to go through the process of having a lawyer defend you against it. So, I think the question is, I would really sort of compare things and say, what is the level of supervision that you would be providing if you were doing it with them? And if you can say, well, you can, if it's a minor, to say, yeah, if you can have a parent or guardian or someone over 18 go with you, you could go off and do this. And if that's the understanding, then at some level, you may be trying to duplicate the level of supervision. But your best bet is really to sort of talk to insurance and legal folks about that. The website for the virtual first aid training, it's the Wilderness Medical Society. It's wms.org. And they have that posted. I got an email because I'm a member, but they have that posted on their website. I think I'm through all of the questions. So for everybody
it
who
looks like
hung
you
out,
hit them all, Rick. Thank you so much.
for everybody who hung out and for joining us today, thanks so much. Sherry, thank you
Rick, thank
for
you.
hosting this.
Yeah, it was great information, very thorough, and it was well received by many people. We've had lots of great comments in the chat, so thank you.
Awesome. All right, well, I'll get the PowerPoint out to Sherry and we'll get this stuff distributed. As I said, there'll be some links to some of the other materials, and I'll be doing another webinar next Friday, sort of looking at incident database collection. That'll be just one that I'm running. AEE isn't running that, but I'll send that off with people in case you're interested.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
All right. Thanks, Sherry.